Okay, let's look at the types of chemical bonds. There are three that we're going to do. The first kind is called an ionic bond. And an ionic bond occurs between a metal and a non-metal. So you look at your bond, you identify what the left one is, if it's a metal, and if the right one's a non-metal, then it's an ionic bond. 2 is a covalent / molecular bond. That is one that occurs between a non-metal and a non-metal. I'm lazy, so I'm not going to write out metal anymore. I'm just going to call it an M. And for non-metals, I'm going to call it NM. And that means that non-metal and non-metal. Okay, that's what that means. Metal is an M, non-metal is NM. The third type is going to be something called a polyatomic. Usually you just call it a polyatomic, but I'll just kind of stick with calling things bonds. So this is going to be a polyatomic bond. That, well, I should probably explain to you what a polyatomic is first. So this thing, this polyatomic ion, it's when you already have a chemical bond and that group of elements still has an ionic charge. So this is a compound that still has an ionic charge. Okay, if we take out our periodic table and you flip, or not your periodic table, your ion sheet, the negative ion side, that has a whole bunch of polyatomic ions. Anything that's got more than one atom and has an ionic charge. There's a few on the positive side. There's ammonium, and that's about it. And then there's a whole bunch down here. You may be able to see them, you may not. I'm going to still list you off a few examples of some polyatomic ions. So for example, if you're looking at that ion sheet, you might see on the negative ion side, you might see something called cyanide. Cyanide would be capital C, capital N, 1-. You'd also see something called hydrogen sulfate. Sulfate, ATE. Not sulfide, IDE. But hydrogen sulfate is HSO4, 1-. They don't always have to be 1-. Just like, again, if you look, you'd see phosphate, and that would be PO4, 3-. So when we have our polyatomic bonds, that'll either be a metal and a polyatomic, or in the rare case, a polyatomic and a non-metal. So essentially you're just going to identify a polyatomic as, or a polyatomic bond as having a polyatomic ion in it, and then you don't even have to really know what the names are. You can look those up. Okay, so let's get rid of this and let's bring down this. This is just a quick little types of bond practice. So let's see here. What you should probably do would be to push pause and see if you can identify those as ionic, capital I, molecular, capital M, or polyatomic with a P. Okay, so push pause. Okay, let's see what you did. See how you did. Well, this first one here, you can look at the left and the right. It doesn't really matter. I'll start with the left. This is lithium. Lithium's a metal. Oxygen's a non-metal. So metal and non-metal means ionic bond, capital I. K2S, K is potassium, S is sulfur. That's also ionic, metal and nonmetal. Iron, iron's a metal, sulfur's a nonmetal. Phosphorus and chlorine, nonmetal, nonmetal, so that's covalent. Or you could have called it molecular. Carbon and hydrogen, well, that's nonmetal, nonmetal, covalent or molecular. N2O4, metal, nonmetal, nonmetal, so it's covalent or molecular. And calcium and a polyatomic. That's polyatomic. That's polyatomic, so, and that's polyatomic. So just by looking, I don't even have to identify what the left one is. I just see that those are polyatomics. So I kept them in the order that I showed them to you. Ionic first, molecular, covalent second, polyatomic third. You have lots of things in your notes where you can actually check and see if you know what's going on with this stuff. So there you go.